and he always stays in the background. He's always very humble, but at the same time very learned, and he also was very exemplary in his own lifestyle in preaching Krishna consciousness. He's been initiated in ISKCON for many years now, and he continues to support this temple with all his talents and with his whole family. And we are very eager and grateful that he'll be speaking this evening. Haribol. Haribol.
Yeah, something. Two screens are coming.
Yeah, the speaker notes are
Maybe you have
visible.
to. Yeah. Maybe close it or minimize it. Yeah, now it's good.
I need to see it.
Actually, you need to select a dual screen.
Yeah. And you have it extended? Apple. I know that apple.
Now we see your desktop.
So this is the summary of chapter 1 to 6 in the sense start with confusion, you know. Confused.
Extend the screen so
The screen is not coming out to screen. There is a shortcut.
it's a Mac people.
He's Mac guy, so I use it's check.
You see your desktop.
Desktop.
It's your desktop right now.
Desktop.
Can you not just drag the window over?
You have to drag and drop.
Drag the window over. This window.
Mac.
Nobody's a Mac.
It's not a Mac.
It's not a Mac?
It's not a Mac. The
Yeah,
thing is
it
just
shows
it's an
Windows, but
HP
it's a Mac.
computer.
Oh, it's a
Oh, is this the Apple? Is this
It's not a Mac, it's just on top of it. Yeah. No, Mac size on top of it. Yeah.
Poster of the Mac.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is Windows. I also get confused, they use the Mac symbol.
On her computer. Yeah.
What happened?
So many tech support.
What station?
Overlap.
Oh.
Okay, now since Nilamani Prabhu is trying to figure out, we'll have Jai Radha Madhav.
moving around.
You want me to start?
The problem
I wasn't planning to sing Jada I was just gonna go into.
Too bad you left to
I'll
sing.
just read. Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Bhaja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira
Email this presentation to your computer.
Where's the file? Where's the file? Do you know where the file is?
I don't know. Hey, but go to presentation. PowerPoint, right? Huh? So must be saved somewhere, right? No, so go to the last file. No. Last file. Okay, click here. So wherever the last file is, right? Go to PPT. Yeah, go click.
Hare Krishna, Hare
Yeah, go. Don't worry.
Krishna Krishna, Hare
So that's okay, Prabhu. So just open the other computer. It's in the Google Docs. So you can download directly. No, but he made it in Google Docs, Prabhu. He made it in Google presentation. It's not a Microsoft. Now it's good. Now it's good, Prabhu. It's not touch screen. Yeah, now it's good, Prabhu. It's good. Now it's good.
Thank you. I don't know, last time I was not sure why.
This Google Docs stuff.
Nilmani Prabhu's touches me.
No. Lord wanted you to sing Radha.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Chakshurunamritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavani Pashyakari Shatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. All right. Thank you everyone for coming for the Sunday Feast program. First, I would like to thank Nilmani Prabhu for picking on me again to do class. Apologize, I just prepared this today, so hopefully there won't be too many mistakes. I had an exam this morning, so that's my excuse. So I didn't have time to really prepare. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about Bhagavad Gita, chapters 1 to 6. There's a lot of information in chapters 1 to 6, so my goal is to just kind of cover it at a high level, kind of give you a whirlwind tour of the 6 chapters. And the idea is not to go into in-depth on any particular topic. It's just to kind of give you a feel of how the chapters flow from one to the next and how they connect. Because generally what we do, we pick on a verse and then we kind of go deep into it, but we don't really understand kind of the flow of the chapter. So hopefully that will come through today, and you kind of get a kind of higher level, like a 10,000 foot view of these 6 chapters. So if you see this picture, this is like a jewel box. So this is described by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He kind of describes Bhagavad Gita as like a jewel box, where like you see the top part, the bottom part like is Karma Yoga, the middle, which is the jewel, is Bhakti Yoga, and then the top, the lid, is Jnana Yoga. So Bhagavad Gita is broken up into like these 3 sections, and in the middle 6 chapters are Bhakti Yoga. And that's why, and Bhakti Yoga is the most valuable part, and that's why it's in the middle, and that's why the jewel. So today I'll focus on the Karma Yoga section. One second. Not sure why. The notes don't show. Maybe I'll just wing it, I guess.
Yes.
It's not
You had the
PowerPoint. It's not
exam this
PowerPoint, right? It's not PowerPoint, bro?
It's not, it's
No,
like
no,
in a
this is
Google Doc.
Google
Google
Slide.
Slide, that's why.
That's fine.
Alright. Anyway,
You can see on your phone.
Yeah, you can pick
no.
up.
No, that'll be tricky.
Nope.
Anyway, so first chapter 1, as we know, they're on the battlefield, Kurukshetra, and Dhritarashtra is asking Sanjaya, what did they do on the battlefield? Right? So he's asking Sanjaya, so the reason for him asking is that he's concerned, because he cares about the Kauravas, his 100 sons are on one side, and the Pandavas are on the other side. So he's asking, what did they do? And his intent was, did they, he was half hoping that the Pandavas would have kind of given up and decided not to fight. So he was kind of asking Sanjaya, like, did actually anything happen? Was there actual war? Did one side give up? Because he was he had these concerns. And then Duryodhan, he starts speaking to the Dronacharya and Bhishma and the other and his like lieutenants, and to kind of pump them up, to make them feel confident. He's describing his own army. He's kind of saying that our army, or the Kaurava army, is much more powerful than the Pandava army, and he's just trying to pump up his men. And then what happens is then the conch shells start to get blown. So on the Pandava side, Lord Krishna blows his conch shell, and Arjuna blows his conch shell as well. And these conch shells, like the loud of so earth-shattering, it kind of dampens the confidence of the Kauravas. And then what Krishna, he asks Krishna, Arjuna asks Krishna to take the chariot in between the two armies so that he could see everyone that was there. And then once he goes there, he suddenly feels afraid, because, or not afraid, but he feels lacking confidence in his ability to actually go and fight, because he sees the relatives, he sees his teachers, he sees his uncles, he sees brothers and so on, and he suddenly feels very remorseful that, okay, I'm going to end up killing these people, and these are the people I love, and especially his teacher, right, Dronacharya and Bhishma, he felt really bad about fighting against them. So suddenly he started having trembling, his hair was standing on end in anxiety, and he gave several reasons why he does not want to fight. One of them being like compassion, right? So he felt compassion for all of his kinsmen, even on the other side that he was about to fight. And second, he felt like he wouldn't, even if he won, he wouldn't feel any enjoyment to even win, right? Even if he won, like everyone who he would want to enjoy with would be dead. Third, he had a fear of sinful reactions, right? So killing his teachers and killing his uncles and people that he looked up to, he felt that there would be a sinful reaction to that. And fourth, like family destruction. So his concern was, if all of these senior people are killed, then who's going to maintain family traditions? What's going to happen with, there'll be a lack of religiosity within the environment. The women who are left behind, they may get taken advantage of, and then that would lead to unwanted progeny, and so on and so on. So he kept coming up with all these different excuses in his head, and at some point he just kind of said, I don't want to fight anymore. And he kind of put his arms down, and he told Krishna that I just don't want to fight, and after giving all these reasons to him. So these are what I just explained. So now Arjuna has put down his arms, and he's he doesn't want to fight anymore, right? So he tells tells Krishna, like, he basically tells Krishna, because up till now he's been treating Krishna as his friend. So now he submits to Krishna, or surrenders to Krishna, and says, I'm feeling miserly weakness. And actually I'll show you the verse. So this is the verse. Karpanya dosho pahata svabhava prachamitam dharma samudacheta yakshe yashanishita gurumitam me shishyaseham stadi mam tvam praparanam. So he says, now I'm confused about my duty. I have lost all composure because of miserly weakness. In this condition, I am asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I'm your disciple and soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. So now he's kind of changed his relationship with Krishna, and now he's become his disciple. And then Krishna sees this, he smiles slightly, and now the mood changes. Now Krishna kind of takes charge the situation and starts to instruct Arjuna. And the first thing he starts to tell him about is this concept of Sankhya Yoga. So it starts to go into what is the soul, and because what he tells Arjuna is that you're speaking like a wise man, but you're actually like very foolish. So he's explaining to him that we are not these bodies, we are the soul, and there is a few verses. So this one verse is one that he speaks. Dehinosmin yatha dehe somaram yoganam jara tata dehamtara prapti ivastatra namuyati. In translation, as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So this is a very important, lesson for everyone in general, right? That we should understand that we are not these bodies, we are the spirit soul. And then there is another one here. Na jayate mriyate vakadachin nayam bhutva bhavita panabuya ajo nitya sashvato yam purano nahanyate hanyamane sharire. For the soul there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, nor does he come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever-existing, primeval, is not slain when the body is slain. So who can give some other characteristics of the soul? Anyone?
Indestructible.
Indestructible, yes.
Cannot be withered by the wind, cannot be made wet by water.
Cannot be withered by the wind, cannot be wet.
Cannot be burned by fire.
Cannot be burnt. Eternal.
Timeless.
Timeless.
Part and parcel of Krishna.
Part and parcel of Krishna.
Very small.
Tiny, yeah. 1/10,000 the tip of the hair. So, and there's more, but yeah, there's a lot of characteristics. So Krishna is explaining this to kind of explain that you're Arjuna, you are the soul, and all of these people are actually the soul. They cannot be killed, really. Only the bodies can be killed. And there's also an example given of a drowning man with clothes. So if a man is in the ocean and he's drowning, the society thinks of saving the body. Well, we generally think about saving the body, but we don't think about saving the soul. And so when we, if a man's drowning, you wouldn't try to save his clothes, right? You would try to save the person who's wearing the clothes. In the same way, we should be looking to save our own souls and souls of others by taking to Krishna consciousness. So he goes on to explain to tolerate dualities. So when we say dualities like hot and cold, or happiness and sadness, so Krishna explains all of these. Yeah, I thought I had a verse on that, but yeah. So he says, understand or tolerate dualities, and then you'll become eligible for liberation. And next he starts to explain Sakam Karma Yoga, right? So he's trying to tell Arjuna that you should fight even for like material gain. Like, so if you fight and you win, then you will get the kingdom. If you don't win, then you'll die, but you'll still attain heavenly planning. So either way, it's a win-win situation. And then he starts to talk about Buddhi Yoga and Nishkam Karma Yoga. So Buddhi Yoga and Nishkam Karma Yoga are kind of similar in that it talks about action without incurring action. So the idea is that when you perform your actions or your prescribed actions, whatever it is, maybe your job or your duties, whatever they are, for maintaining your family, you should give up the results and not be attached to them, be detached from those things. And by doing so, you're kind of performing this Nishkam Karma Yoga, detached work, and you're not incurring the reactions of those things. So, Vyavisa Buddhi, right? This means one-pointed intelligence. And then lastly, he talks about the Sthita Prajna. So this is like a person who is like a wise person, and Arjuna asks a few questions like, what are this person's general symptoms? How does he speak? How does he sit? And how does he walk? So when he says how does he speak, he's asking how does he respond to dualities. And then when he says how does he sit, it means how does he control his senses, and how does he walk refers to how does he respond to sense objects. So when you say how does he speak, it's explained that this Sthita Prajna is undisturbed in mind and equipoise. Equipoise meaning that if whether happiness comes or sadness comes or victory or defeat, he doesn't feel strongly either way. He just accepts what comes. And then how does he control his senses? He withdraws his senses. So the analogy given in the Bhagavad Gita is that he's like a tortoise, right? So a tortoise withdraws his limbs when he comes in danger. In the same way, this Sthita Prajna controls senses by withdrawing his senses from sense objects. And then he also ceases sense enjoyment by experiencing the higher taste. So instead of just completely stopping sensory, material activities, he'll try to achieve the higher taste, meaning, to give an example, like in the temple, instead of eating food outside, you eat prasadam. So that is kind of going for the higher taste. You're not eating, but you are eating, but you're eating prasadam, which doesn't carry any reaction. And then, So at the end, towards the end, Krishna tells Arjuna, stay away from abominable activities and replace that with Buddhi Yoga. By using Buddhi Yoga, refrain from abominable activities. And then Arjuna misunderstood this instruction. And Arjuna thought that what Krishna is telling me is to take up kind of the path of renunciation rather than the path of action. So Arjuna asks, so then he gets confused, like, what are you telling me to do? Do you want me to fight, or do you want me to take up the path of renunciation? And then, like in the next chapter, Krishna explains what he meant. So, in chapter 3, so chapter 3, Arjun's confusion is there, right? Whether I should take the path of renunciation or action. So there's a couple of ways this kind of is tackled by Lord Krishna in the chapter. First, on the left side, he says Nishkam Karma Yoga is better for Arjuna than sannyas, because sannyas or the path of Jnana Yoga is difficult. And what he says is like from the path of Karma Kanda we should take to the path of Karma Yoga. And then also on the other side he says that Arjuna, even if you're qualified for sannyas, you should still work, because by working you're setting up the right example for others. Everyone should work, and even Krishna works even though he doesn't have any requirement to work or do anything. He has no need, but he still performs activities just to set the right example for everyone else. So by avoiding abominable activities, Krishna meant to use Buddhi Yoga over Karma Kanda rather than Buddhi Yoga over action. But that was the misunderstanding that Arjuna had, and this was confusing to him, because on the one hand Lord Krishna is telling him you have to fight, and then he's apparently saying to him that no, you should take up this path of knowledge. So that Krishna kind of clarifies that, but then Arjun gets confused even later on at the end of the 4th chapter. So then this question also comes up again. So lastly, in this 3rd chapter, he talks about lust. So he says, Krishna says, lust is the biggest enemy for us in our spiritual path, and he explains that lust sits in 3 different places: one in our intelligence, in our mind, and in our senses. And the best way to conquer it is to start back with the senses. So if you can control the senses, then you can start to control lust. And also, you have to tackle lust with transcendental knowledge. So that's what the topic of the next chapter is. So that's the connector there. Like Krishna tells him, look, you can control lust by transcendental knowledge, and in chapter 4 he starts to explain more about transcendental knowledge. One thing about lust is also that it's compared. So the lust that affects humans is not as deep rooted as it is with animals and trees. So the comparison given in Gita is that like how smoke covers a fire, you can still see the fire through the smoke, right? So it's not like a very hard covering. That's the effect of lust on humans. But then when you get to animals, they're more affected by lust, the covering of lust, and it's compared to like a mirror covered by dust. So that's a thicker covering. And then 3rd, trees. So that's compared to like a child, like an embryo of a baby inside the womb. That's a very thick covering. So there's a lot more stronger lust covering. And then the other point mentioned is that the senses, so there's a hierarchy of control between what we have. We start with the senses, then the mind can control the senses, then the intelligence can control the mind, and then at the top of it is the soul. So, but the mind is so powerful that it can overpower the intelligence. So, this verse is part of chapter 3, important verse, I'll just read it. Prakriti kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha ahankara vibhuratma kartaham iti manyate. The spirit so bewildered by the intelligent influence of false ego thinks himself the doer of activities that are actually carried out by the 3 modes of material nature. So I'll touch upon this point later, but basically there are 3 doers. One is the jiva, which is us. Second is purusha, or super soul. So super soul sanctions the desires of the jiva, and then once it's sanctioned the modes of material nature, prakriti carries out that desire. So chapter 4. So now, as I said, Krishna has explained that lust has to be conquered in order to make progress. And now, chapter 4, Lord Krishna starts by explaining the nature of his appearance. So these are very kind of famous verses here, but firstly he starts with explaining that this knowledge of Bhagavad Gita is passed down through parampara. So originally Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita to the sun god Vivaswan, and that was millions of years ago. And then the Vivaswan spoke it to Ikshvaku, who passed it down to Manu, and then Manu passed it down to the kings. Right? And then what the kings do, or what they used to do, nowadays they don't, but they would pass down this spiritual knowledge to the people. So they were given that knowledge, and then they would distribute that knowledge to the subjects in the kingdom. And this is the way spiritual knowledge was propagated. But as Krishna explains, this chain was broken at some point and this knowledge was lost. So now he's explaining this knowledge to Arjuna because he explains that Arjuna is his friend and his devotee. So this is important. Another important instruction for us, that And in order to really understand this knowledge, we should be Lord Krishna's devotee. So there's some nice verses in this chapter. I'll just okay, so this one, Evam Parampara Praptam Imam Rajasayo Vidu Sakalene Mahata Yogo Nashta Parantapa. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic session, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science appears to be lost. Now, Krishna starts to explain the nature of his appearance. First, he says that he appears millennium after millennium when there is a rise of irreligion and there's a decline in religious practices. So that's why he says he appears, millennium after millennium. And then once he appears, what does he do? He's explaining this verse. Paritanaya sadhunam vinasaya chaduchkratam dharma samsthapanataya sambhavami veda. To deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as re-establish the principles of religion, I myself appear millennium after millennium. So Krishna has multiple reasons for appearing, but the primary reason is to please his devotees, because actually he doesn't really need to appear to annihilate miscreants or kill demons. That can be done in other ways. He doesn't actually have to appear, but he appears himself to please his devotees. Then he also explains this verse. Janma karma chame divyam evam yoga kitatvatana tyakva deham punah janma naitimam etiso Arjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take birth again in the material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. So he's explaining also that he explains to Arjuna that he remembers all of his previous appearances because he is God. He can do that, and he also remembers everyone else's previous lives. But we can't even remember what we did yesterday at the same time. Even if you think 1 hour ago, what did I do? What was I exactly doing? You'll struggle to even remember what that is. But Krishna remembers not only his life, but every single other living entity. That's why he's the Lord, right? Coming back. So Krishna explains all of these, points about his own nature, his divine appearance. So this is kind of considered So then, what he does next is explains. He says, I reciprocate with the devotees. So, however you approach Krishna is how he will reciprocate with you. So that is the next point that he explains. And then he explains about understanding karma on the platform of Gyan. So in action. So he explains 3 different types of karma. So there's karma, akarma, and vikarma. Karma means performing your prescribed actions. Akarma can mean either not performing any action, or it can mean performing actions which doesn't have any reaction that comes with it. And vikarma is performing action like forbidden actions, like maybe something criminal or whatever it is, but something that you should not be doing. So this is explained, and then also Krishna explains the 4 varnas, right? So there's 4 ashrams, right? Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, right? So these are 4 varnas. So Krishna explains that he creates this system, but he's not subject to it. So, and then, we have this caste system, but what is explained actually is that you're not really fixed by birth to any of these varnas. It's based on your proclivities, how you behave, how you act. You fall into one of these varnas by that, in that way. Right? Also then, Krishna explains about the different types of sacrifice, and then he talks about more about sacrifice later, but ultimately the goal of sacrifice is to attain knowledge. And then when you perform sacrifice, you have some kind of intent of some result. Ultimately, the goal of the sacrifice is to attain the transcendental knowledge. And then there's a cycle of sacrifice. I don't have the picture here, but basically Krishna explains that every living body subsists on grains. And the grains, where do they come from? The rains. And then where do the rains come from? They are born of the yajna. And how are what triggers the yajna is the prescribed actions. And then where do the prescribed actions come from? Vedas. Vedas come from Vishnu. So ultimately you have a circle there, and the idea is that whatever grains we have, we should offer them to Vishnu, because that's where the root of what we subsist on is coming from Vishnu. Also, Krishna explains the different types of workers performing different types of work as a sacrifice, like in different, say, brahmacharis perform different types of sacrifices, and sannyas and so on. So I'm not going to explain all of those, but that's explained. And then, in order to receive transcendental knowledge, one way is that's explained is this by approaching a guru. So tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya padekshanti te jnanam jnanastabhadarshana. So it explains that you should approach a spiritual master in a humble mood, in a submissive mood, and inquire submissively. And in that way, the spiritual master will give transcendental knowledge to you. So, and then lastly there in this chapter, Krishna tells Arjun, get up and fight and perform reaction-free work in knowledge. But also towards the end of the chapter, he's also, as is mentioned there on the left side, he's also giving some instructions in terms of like performing renunciation. So again, Arjuna gets confused. Like, are you telling me to act in karma yoga, or are you telling me to act in jnana yoga? Like, what exactly do you want me to do, Krishna? So, going into the next chapter. Now that question came up at the end of the third chapter, and now it's coming up again now. And now, it came up at the end of the second chapter, and now it's coming up at the end of the fourth chapter. So in the fifth chapter, Lord Krishna explains again that ultimately, Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga, they're actually ultimately the same thing. But for your purpose and as a recommendation, Krishna says you should take up Karma Yoga. Because it's more practical, it's safer, right? It's less risky, and it's actually easier to do. So we'll talk about that in a bit. So he kind of explains a bit more about what Nishkam Karma Yoga is, detached work, and see if there's any verses here, right? So this is just summary of what I just said, right? So in chapter 3, there was the confusion about renunciation or action, and then Krishna explained that Nishkam Karma Yoga is better. And again, now he's explaining, Arjun brought the question up again, and Krishna explains that both of them are equal, but Karma Yoga is easier, and therefore he should take that up. So this is one of the important verses. Yehi samsparsa yaboga dukkha yonaya evate adiyantavanta konteya nateshu ramate buddha. An intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. So why are material pleasure miserable? This is a question for you guys.
Is there temporary?
Temporary.
Comes to an end.
Right, they come to an end. So we enjoy something, but then it never lasts, right? Like, and then we are spirit souls, right? So we are, like as we said earlier, we are eternal. So we're looking for something that's eternal. We're looking for eternal happiness, but we're not able to find it in this world because every kind of happiness we can find is temporary. So ultimately, it's miserable. So. The next verse here is, wait. So before, like towards the end of the 5th chapter, Lord Krishna starts to explain about Dhyana Yoga. And then in the 6th chapter, he talks more in depth on that topic, and he explains the 8 stages of Astanga Yoga. But the last thing he mentions is this peace formula verse, which is very important. So we'll recite that. Bhaktaram yagna tapasam sarva loka maheshwaram sutram sarva bhutanam natamam shanti rachati. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets, demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living beings, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. So the first line, Bhaktaram Yagna Tapasam, Lord Krishna is saying, I'm the ultimate enjoyer and so I'm the enjoyer and I'm the proprietor. So the second line says, Sarva Loka Maheshwaram, I'm the proprietor of all the planets and all the demigods. So he's explaining that he's the enjoyer, he's the proprietor of everything. Right? So now we understand that we can't claim to be owner of anything. And there's always wars going on all over the world, and we have war going on in Eastern Europe, and people are fighting over pieces of land that they think that they own, and Krishna is saying here that everything is owned by him. He's the proprietor. So if we all understood that, okay, that we are not the owners of anything, in this world, Krishna is the owner, and we should treat it as his property, then a lot of these wars would disappear. And that's why, another reason why it's called the peace formula. Third line, Surtam Sarva Bhutanam. So he's explaining that he brings, he's the well-wisher of all the living entities, mainly because he's giving instruction of bhakti to everyone. And then lastly there, he says that one who understands this attains peace. So not only do you attain peace, worldwide peace, but you attain personal peace as well from these pangs of miseries by understanding this verse. So now, chapter 6. So as I explained, in the last chapter, he touched upon the idea of Dhyana Yoga towards the end, and now he explains the 8 stages of Astanga Yoga. And I have this table here, right? So there's 8 stages of Astanga Yoga. They are Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. So the first one means like things that you should not do. Yama. And then Niyama is the things you should do. Asana are the bodily exercises, right? Like yoga is so popular these days, right? It's always a focus on this third point, bodily exercises. Pranayama, breathing exercises. Pratyahara, withdrawing the senses from sense objects. Dharana, fixing the mind on the Lord's form. So these are kind of progressively getting more and more kind of advanced, right? And then, so these are broken up into 2, like a basic set, so the first 5, and then the last 3 are advanced. So Aruda represents the advanced stage, the last 3, and Aruruksha is the first 5. So when you're in the first 5 stages, you should continue to perform your prescribed actions. But when you get to last 3, you can actually give up your prescribed actions and you can kind of become more of like a renunciant. Krishna explains that in order to make progress in this yoga, you have to have control of your mind. So there's a few verses that he goes into that I don't have here, but he explains that he explains the nature of the mind. The mind is chanchalam, meaning it's always like jumping around here and there, right? It's never steady. It's stubborn, obstinate. It's very powerful, strong, right? It can overpower the intelligence very easily. And so controlling it requires some practice, right? And then upon hearing all of this, right? So, Astanga Yoga is not easy, right? So it requires, like Krishna explains, you need to sit on a kusha grass mat and a deer skin mat. On top of that, you need to sit not too high, not too low. You need to focus on the tip of your nose. You need to regulate your food, eating habits, your sleeping habits, your daily activities. You need to sit in a secluded place. So many restrictions are there in order to follow this path of Jnana Yoga. But he's explaining it. And then upon hearing all of this, Arjuna's like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do all this. And, Arjuna was a grihastha, right? He had a family. How is he going to go and take a 6-month sabbatical or something, take off and go in the forest and secluded place and practice? It's not practical for him. Secondly, he understood that controlling the mind, which is a key component here, is not easy. And he says, like, controlling the wind is easier than actually controlling the mind. So he says to Krishna, I'm not going to be able to do this, just mainly because I can't control the mind. It's too hard. And then Krishna explains that yes, it's difficult, but it's not impossible. It's possible if you practice and so abhyas and vairagya, right? So abhyas is practice, vairagya is detachment. So by performing both of these things, we can slowly control the mind. The other point he says is if you, we know that when we chant Hare Krishna, our mind wanders off here and there all the time, right? And that's normal. But what we should be doing is bringing the mind back every time we notice that it's wandered off somewhere. So that's what Krishna says in this chapter. He says that when the mind goes off somewhere, you just bring it back. Just keep bringing it back. Keep bringing it back. And then slowly over time, the mind will kind of be trained. Just a small story there. I took part in this japa call the other day. Because my mind is always my chanting is always terrible. So I joined the japa call and I was asked to chant on the call for everyone. And then because I didn't want my chanting to sound terrible, so I was really, really focusing on listening to it and making sure I was pronouncing all the syllables correctly. And I noticed that because I was just paying attention and putting that effort in, I was really it was the first time in a long time that I was actually focused, and I was listening to every word really carefully. So just a side note, if anyone wants to join that japa call, it was posted on the WhatsApp group. There's a link there, and side benefit is what I just said.
Yeah. Ask them to contact Sandili Mataji to sign up.
Yeah, if you can contact Sandali Mataji. She's here. I think she can put her hand up. So if you would like to chant, and it really helps. It really helped me. I didn't even realize that would help me, but that was a big benefit. So anyway, coming back. So now Krishna explains how to control the mind. He explains next thing. Arjuna asks, what is the destination of the unsuccessful yogi? Right? Somebody takes part in this process of yoga, but they don't finish. Like, so by the time of the end of their life, they don't complete that. What happens to those people? So Krishna explains that if somebody makes a small amount of progress, in their next life they'll be born in like one of the higher planets, the heavenly planets, where they'll get to enjoy. And then after that, they've expended those credits. They'll come back and they'll take birth in some kind of aristocratic family or wealthy family, where they'll be able to kind of continue their progress. But if someone made a lot of progress in this life before dying, but they didn't get all the way, maybe they got to 80%, right? Then in the next life, they don't go to heavenly planets. Krishna gives them birth in a family, like a transcendentalist family or a devotee family, where they can immediately pick up where they left off and finish off the job and get to that 100% and go back to the spiritual world. So Krishna explains this. And then lastly, he explains like what is the topmost type of yoga. And then Krishna explains that Bhakti is the topmost form of yoga, and this verse explains that. Yogina api sarvesham madgate nanta atmana shadavam bhajate yomam same yukta tamo mataha. And of all yogis, the one with great faith who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me. He is the most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. So Krishna is basically, this is what, description of a devotee. So devotees always are thinking of Krishna, whatever they're doing. They render loving service to him, and they always worship him. And Krishna says that those devotees are most intimately united with him and are the highest of all. So now this ends chapter 6, and then chapters 7 through 12 talk about Bhakti Yoga. So that, as I explained at the beginning, all of that is explained in the next 7 chapters. So maybe in a few months, maybe I'll cover the next 6 chapters. So hopefully that made sense. Any questions? Yes.
What was your example today?
That was alright. It wasn't too bad.
So I had to ask you, what's your favorite section from this first 6 chapter section or verse, or what really stuck you, or what,
I would say the mind control stuff, because it hits close to home. Because I'm always struggling with mind control, especially when I'm chanting, and in general with just things. Just staying focused on a task is challenging sometimes. So it was nice to see Krishna's instructions of how to do that, like very practical instructions. And then, like as I said, that japa call experience was very eye-opening for me. But yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Beautiful class and summary. I have a question about the peace formula. It says that we
Last
just
verse,
know
534.
person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices
Chapter
and
5.
austerities, supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. I'd like to think that I know these things, but I still experience the material miseries very much. So what am I doing wrong?
I don't know if everyone heard that. So I think Prabhuji is saying that this explanation here meant, I guess, you acknowledge it, but it hasn't really, I would say you've acknowledged it, but you haven't really fully realized it to the point where your material miseries, have subsided. So I think understanding it is one thing. I guess fully realizing in your heart that, what's said here is a different thing. Same thing with like saying, I'm not the body, right? We all know that. But do we really know in our heart that we're not this body? I mean, I don't, right? I'm always thinking on the bodily level, like I just can't help it. But it's a realization thing, I think. I think so. Once you get more advanced in bhakti, and I think this will come part and parcel of that, like that realization. If anyone wants to add anything, yes.
Yes, thank you. I think that's really the main core of it, is the realization. Because what Krishna is saying in this verse, he's saying there's two things. I'm very big and strong. That means he controls the planets and all. That's how big and strong I am. Second, I'm your friend. So if you really feel Krishna's presence in your life, feel it, know it. See, Gyatva Mam means to really know that he's with me right now in my heart. Gyatva means to really know and feel his presence and recognize that he's that strong. So if you know somebody's strong but he's not your friend, then you don't feel at peace. If somebody's your friend but he's not very strong, that's not very helpful either. If someone's very strong and your friend and with you all the time, and if you really know it, then you'll be at peace. Otherwise, it's just a theoretical.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Very nice lecture. Whatever karma we do without Krishna consciousness, that is known as Nishkam karma?
Yeah, so the difference between karma yoga and bhakti yoga is only one thing. You're doing the same thing, except when you're doing bhakti yoga, you're doing it for the pleasure of Krishna. So in karma yoga, you're doing your actions, you're doing in a detached way. In bhakti yoga, we do everything, right? We don't renounce any actions. We go to jobs and we do the same thing that everyone else does, except we try, not speaking for myself, but we try to dedicate or do what we can, in our daily lives for the pleasure of Krishna, or ultimately towards the purpose of Krishna consciousness. So that's the only difference between a karma yogi and a bhakti yogi. Yes, Prabhu.
I just want to add one comment to that question, right? I mean, there's very, very subtle difference between karma yoga and bhakti yoga. That's why Srila Prabhupada sometimes interchangeably uses karma yoga as bhakti yoga as karma yoga, right? The only difference I think is in karma yoga, you're still doing detached way, but you're still a little bit attached to the karma activities. Whereas in bhakti yoga, you are doing anything and whatever you want to please Krishna, doesn't matter. In karma yoga, you might choose certain activities which you like, but you are not attached to those activities. But it's a very subtle difference between karma and bhakti yoga.
Thank you. Yes, Nathan.
Okay, my acknowledge, my personal. When you sit in a room quietly, pin drop sign, and you tell your mind, sit with me, and you listen to heart, tick, 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 tick. You can hear loud. That's a God is talking to you in a quiet language. Quiet language is talking to you. Then you ask him the question, he will answer you. And every time you try to do something bad thing, listen, tick, 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 tick. He will say, don't do this, don't do that. This way you control your mind and control your soul. We all are God's children, God within us, telling us everything through the heartbeat. So that is our soul.
Thank you. Very nice realization. Very lucky that you. Okay, anyone else?
I think the clock is going tick tick also.
Yeah, I think we're well over the 10 minutes. So thank you, everyone. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Nandan Acarya Prabhu, for the wonderful crash course of first 6 chapters. Haribol! Round of applause. Thank you. We look forward to hearing the rest of it when you're ready for that. And dear devotees, thank you for joining. As Nandan Acarya Prabhu testified here, do sign up for the course, the morning program. 5:30 to 7:30, you can join anytime. We have some slots available where you can sign up to lead. So there's a half an hour slots that you can sign up to lead. And so Sandila Mataji, she's right there. You can contact her. She can, sign you up for that. It's a really good exercise. If you can sign up and you take the lead for that slot, you will realize that, yes, it really helps you focus and go deeper into the holy name. And it's nice when everybody can join. So please join for that. It's a new initiative that started just this last week on Gaur Purnima. Hare Krishna.